Hello, I'm Evelina Deleanu. Over the last 7 years, my team and I have done research in nuclear plants, oil and gas fields, refineries, industrial steel warehouses, inventory yards for offshore rig parts, fuel terminals. In that time, I have found myself arrived at a destination that was 10 miles from where I was supposed to be, and I had gotten lost in the middle of nowhere on more than one occasion. I had had sunburns that I couldn't remedy for multiple days, and I had gone hungry because the cafeteria on site closed while I was collecting data. These mishaps and adventures are the foundation of lessons learned that I will share with you today. I will assume that you are an experienced researcher and you know how to do your work. And instead, I will share with you advice about how to stay warm, comfortable, safe, rested, fed, and hydrated. When your basic needs are met, you can then do your outstanding work as a researcher. My advice is grouped into 6 categories: logistics, food and drinks, clothing and protective gear, safety and safety protocols to get you inside the site, technology devices, and some considerations for data collection. There's a lot of ground to cover, and we don't have enough time to do that today, but you can follow along and get additional advice by downloading accompanying slides. Let's start with logistics. What is your overall plan for the visit? How are you traveling to and within your destination? And what should you consider regarding accommodations? If there is one thing that you take away from this talk, it is this. Make sure that you consider every single activity that you have to do when you are traveling and visiting on the site. Consider what are the local traffic patterns and how long it's going to take you to get from your hotel to the destination that you're visiting. How long is it going to take you to return your rental car when you're returning back home? How long is it going to take you to get your breakfast in the morning before you head out to the site? Even, how long is it going to take you to go from point A to point B when you're visiting on site? All of these activities take time and they add up, and they eventually determine how much time you actually have to spend with your end users. In one of my early trips, I missed 6 hours of precious time to collect data from users that were extremely difficult to access. And that was my fault because I did not plan my time correctly. Next, you need to consider how you are traveling to your destination and how you're going to get around once you arrive. If you are flying, make sure that you examine the overall flight schedule for the day to ensure that there is a backup flight in case you have delays or cancellations. If you're traveling to more remote areas and you have a connecting flight, there are several things that you can do to make sure that you catch your connection. Book a seat that puts you towards the front of the plane so that you can onboard quickly. Pack your stuff in a carry-on bag that fits under the seat in front of you so that once the plane lands, you can just grab it and run to your next gate. And examine the airport map to make sure that you know exactly where you need to go and arrive at your next gate quickly. If you are traveling by car, or if you're going to be renting a car once your flight lands, there are a couple things to keep in mind. First, make sure that you have a GPS. Even though the mobile map apps are quite amazing these days, you can lose cellular network signal and the map may be useless to you. More than once I have found myself lost in the middle of nowhere because there was no cellular network and I did not have an alternative way to navigate. Examine if the area where you're traveling has toll roads, and if it does, make sure that you get a toll pass or coins to pay your toll fees. If you're traveling to more remote areas, check the operating hours of the rental car service office. They tend not to work late in the evening or during the night. So if you have a flight that is delayed and you land after the rental car office is closed, you may have no way to get around if the rental car was your only option. Depending on where you're traveling, you may expect there to be rideshare services. I advise you to do your homework and investigate whether that's actually the case and how far the rideshare services extend. You may be able to get a rideshare service to your destination, but getting a rideshare service from your destination may be quite a different topic. At one point, I landed in Philadelphia, had a lift from Philadelphia's airport to a town 1 hour away, and then once I arrived, I realized that I will have to rely on my own 2 feet to get around for the rest of my trip. That was quite unexpected, and I was not prepared for it. As a final point regarding transportation, you may consider looking up local taxi services or even public transportation as means to help you get around. The final thing to consider when thinking about logistics are your accommodations. Where are you going to stay in the mornings and after a day of data collection? When picking your accommodations, consider whether breakfast will be provided and what time breakfast opens. Consider whether there are restaurants, grocery stores, pharmacies, or gas stations nearby. All of these places provide additional conveniences that might be quite handy for you when you're away from home. So, when considering logistics, think about what your overall plan is. Consider the options for traveling to your destination and navigating around, as well as picking comfortable accommodations. Now, let's talk about food and drinks. Here, some items to consider are when and where will you be able to eat when you're on site, whether you should bring your own lunch, and what are the things that you should keep in mind about beverages. Before you head out, ask your host whether there is a cafeteria on site, and if there is, what are the operating hours. Additionally, if you have any sort of dietary needs or restrictions, inquire whether the local cafeteria will be able to meet those needs. Otherwise, you might end up eating toast. Getting a food delivery on site is fine if your host is placing and receiving an order. But because you are a guest, you should not expect a delivery to reach you. When thinking about food on site, I tend to bring my own, and that's my best advice. Pick up some bagels, even some bagged meals at your coffee shop or at a grocery store. I also grab some fruit, nuts, granola bars. When I bring my own food, it means that I can snack between data collection periods, and I can also have my lunch at a time that is convenient to me. And because I have my food with me, I know I will not go hungry. When considering beverages, there are a couple things to keep in mind. For safety reasons, all your containers should have a lid to avoid spills, and your containers should not be made out of glass because that's a safety hazard. Depending on where you're going, access to water fountains or any sort of refill stations may be limited or even non-existent. I tend to bring a gallon of water and leave it in my car. Then I can refill my water bottle throughout the day. When planning to eat and have access to liquids on site, just bring your own. Now let's talk about how to dress and how to protect your body. Let's consider what clothing is appropriate, what protective gear you might need, and how to carry stuff around. When considering clothing, you should forget your office wear and anything that's business casual. If you come to the industrial site in your office attire, you're likely going to stand out as an outsider. My advice is that you dress in darker clothing that is made out of thicker fabric and can withstand the elements of the environment in which you will be. I wear dark jeans, steel-toe boots, several layers of clothing that's either short and long sleeve, and a jacket. Depending on whether you're going to stay indoors or outside, and depending on the season, you may also wear a cap, bring some fingerless gloves, have a rain poncho, a winter jacket, even some wool underwear and socks. I joke about wool underwear, but I had to spend quite a few hours outside of a nuclear plant in Illinois in the middle of winter, and I was grateful for all my base layers. Depending on the site that you're visiting, you may also have to wear protective gear. Protective gear may include a helmet, eyewear, hearing protection, H2S gas detector, fire retardant clothing. All of these items are meant to keep you protected in case something goes boom. When you're shopping for protective gear, make sure that you do not buy it at a general retailer's. Instead, ensure that the gear you get is truly safety rated. Finally, consider how you're going to carry everything around. I highly suggest that you invest in a comfortable, sturdy backpack that you can carry around all day long, put on the floor, or throw in the back of a truck. Having a fanny pack, something that sits on your waist and has key items that you need to access regularly, may also be a handy alternative. Consider how you're going to carry all your items and all your gear when you are on site. You want to make sure that you're safe, but also that you can safely navigate that environment. So, when thinking about clothing and gear, make sure that you are dressed comfortably in materials that can withstand environmental elements, that you have safety-rated gear, and that you have a reliable backpack that can hold all the things that you need when you're visiting the site. Now let's talk about safety and security to get you into and within the site. Here, some things are to consider is obtaining permission to enter the site, navigating within the site, as well as being aware of the safety culture. Depending on the site that you're visiting, your host may have to do a background check on you to allow you to enter the location. In some cases, you may be asked to watch training videos in the visitor center before you're permitted any further. In other cases, you may have to complete training or even obtain certification before you're permitted to go inside. Traveling to an offshore rig, for example, may require a certificate that shows that you would know how to escape a helicopter in case of water crash landing. Even if you're allowed to enter the site, you are very likely not going to be permitted to go everywhere you want to go. Talk to your host ahead of time as to what areas you will be able to enter and observe. Once you understand where you will and will not be permitted to go, you can create your research protocols accordingly. Finally, make sure that you are aware of the safety culture of the industry in which you're working. Examples of safety culture and protocols include holding the handrail as you're walking up or down the stairs, walking on designated walk paths and avoiding shortcuts, not talking on the phone as you're walking. Make sure that you are aware of any appropriate safety behaviors and expectations when you're visiting the site. They're there for your safety, as well as the safety of the employees working at the site. When considering safety and security, make sure that you understand all of the requirements that you need to meet to be allowed to go on site. Make sure that you ask where you will and will not be permitted to go, and what are the standard safety procedures when you are actually at the perimeter. Now, let's talk about technology. Will you have access to the internet, and how will you keep your devices charged? When you're visiting an industrial site, there may be a local Wi-Fi network. Your host might be able to give you guest access to that network. Due to various technical challenges, I suggest that you don't expect that access point to work. If you are relying on access to the internet via a cellular network, keep in mind that cellular signals in industrial sites tend to be weak, intermittent, or non-existent. In some cases, having a hotspot might make sense. I would suggest that you prepare to have no internet access whatsoever and download everything that you need onto your devices and bring printed copies. If the internet works, all the better for you. Otherwise, you are fully prepared. Consider if and when you might have access to an outlet to charge your devices. If you're going from truck to truck and riding along all day long, or if you're walking the perimeter of a nuclear plant, there will probably be no outlets. If you are doing research in extreme temperatures, and especially in cold weather, keep in mind that your battery will wear out much faster than in normal conditions. In some cases, having a portable battery may be worthwhile. Keep in mind that if you bring a battery, that's an extra item that you need to carry along on your back. When thinking about tech devices that you're going to bring with you on site, consider that you will likely have no internet access and that you will need to keep your devices powered yourself. Finally, let's talk about data collection. Do you know the industry basics? Have you considered how and where will you collect data? And what are some of the things that you should keep in mind about your users as you're preparing your research protocols? Make sure you know the industry basics before you head out into the field. You want to make sure that you know enough to make sense of the answers that your users are giving you, rather than be distracted by some of the fundamentals that you should know. As a green rookie researcher, I was out in the field in Texas, and I spent 3 hours talking to a technician who spent the entire time telling me how oil is extracted from the earth. I could have spent those 3 hours asking him about what it means to be a technician, and instead he was educating me because I was not prepared to do my work. Consider the environment and the locations where you will be doing research and collecting your data. If you're going to be walking around all the time, should you bring a clipboard? Perhaps the clipboard is going to be a hindrance because you need to hold on to rails as you're climbing a lot of stairs. Perhaps you're expecting to film or take photos. Maybe you need to obtain permission for doing that from your host or even your host's manager. Finally, let's think about some things that you should keep in mind about your users. In some industries, they're night and day shift workers. Even though they may be using the same tools and following the same processes to do their work, just the fact that they work at different times of a day could influence some of your results. They may have different pain points, different motivations, behavioral drivers. Discuss with your host whether you should be studying both day and night workers. Another element to consider are union versus non-union employees. They may exist within the same organization, but access to union versus non-union employees may be quite different. These groups of users may have different preferences, different needs, different motivations, even when you're studying the same problem. Again, that is something for you to discuss with your host, and you should include that in your research plans and protocols. When planning for data collection, make sure that you know the industry basics, that you have considered how and where you will collect data and record it, and whether there's anything unique about your users that may influence what, where, and how you ask and observe. I have shared a lot of advice with you, and I hope that even if you are a seasoned researcher, there was a nugget of information that you have learned that was new to you. If you are a new researcher or have not been out in the field in a while, I hope that my advice gives you a lot of confidence to go out and do excellent work. As I said earlier, please feel free to download accompanying slides. They have much more information to share than I was able to cover. I wish you all the best in the field, whether that's a nuclear plant, a refinery, or some other place. Thank you.